Good evening, dear Sangha. It is my real pleasure to be with you this evening, to greet you from the homeland of the Coast Miwok people, the territory, unceded, extraordinary territory here in Northern California at the beginning of evening, and sending love and gratitude to all of you this evening, and a real particular gratitude for the Circle of the Way practice at Upaya Zen Center, and for each of you and the extended community in the wider world. So it's a great pleasure and gift to be with you this evening and to turn the Dharma wheel together. And what a wheel this has been for the wheel of the world. What an extraordinary wheel this has been. Since September 24th, this community has been studying, the extended community of some more than 500 people, studying in the World Wide Web, studying one of the earliest and most beloved of the Mahayana sutras, Vimalakirti Nirdesa Sutta, a 2nd century text. The Sanskrit original, so old it was lost for 1,000 years until a version was discovered in the Portola in 2001. 7 translations of this beloved sutra, 7 translations into Chinese, perhaps the most famous by Kumarajiva, who learned Chinese in a prison and brought forth his translation in the year 400. Dong following in 650, and then late Tibetan in the 9th century. And weren't we regaled with the truth of that as we listened a few short, brilliant weeks ago to Professor Robert Thurman. This is a story, a deep and true story for our times. And I want to begin just by touching on a few points. In particular, the title of the Dharma talk tonight is awakening from the illusion of our separation. So the layman Vimalakirti is sick in his bed in the northeastern Indian town of Vaishali. He is alone and wonders, who will inquire after my health, my well-being? Who will console me as I'm sick? And the Buddha hears, as every true Shravaka, one who listens, one who is thus come and listening. He hears Vimalakirti's wondering and tries to send his foremost disciples to interview the layperson. Vimalakirti embodies the Mahayana view of being in the world, but not of it. And yet he understands on every level that he is sick because the world is sick. And please let me say that again. Vimalakirti is sick, is ill, is an invalid because the world is sick. The disciples of the Buddha resist visiting layman Vimalakirti. He upsets all views of traditional spiritual protocol, reminding the disciples again and again that only one who is a bodhisattva can be hassled or harassed or shaken awake by another bodhisattva. And that is our job from the sickbed, to hassle, to harass, and to wake up. This is a matter of life and death. The Dharma of Vimalakirti's sutra is impelled by his illness. Here is a wounded healer bodhisattva, awakening being, dangerous to settled life in every way, and alive with the feral vow to benefit all beings. Bodhisattvas become sick due to their embodied, emergent, enactive compassion, a compassion animated by raw love for others and recognition of how many of us are sick. And near the end of the sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha gives us a fresh name for this old Mahayana teaching. He's refreshed by the antics of Vimalakirti, the Dharma of inconceivable liberation. Because in this incomprehensible world, and we feel this from these weeks of study, immersion in practice, in sitting, in walking, in reading, in reciting, in being renewed by Vimalakirti, in this incomprehensible Saha world, somehow flowers stick to the robes and garments of smug and assured. Samsara and nirvana dance cheek to cheek in a monstrous tango. Goddess and male disciple exchange places, willingly or not so willingly, entering into becoming each other's embodied being. And a garrulous, non-speaking rumbles with thundering silence. This is the realm, as Professor Thurman reminded us, beloved translator and teacher. This is the realm of cognitive dissonance tolerance. Let's get that again. Cognitive dissonance tolerance. Meditation depends on cognitive dissonance tolerance, the doorway into true teaching. And all beings in the 10 directions are invited to cross the threshold and enter into Vimalakirti's sick room. So gratitude for this beloved text. I kiss the books, I put my hands on them. I'm borrowing texts from my beloved Dharma sister, Martha de Barros, and I see her firm handwriting from decades ago as she read and unfolded the Vimalakirti Sutra. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to address you tonight, and also to invite us to, in whatever way is right for you, shake off what you're holding on to. You're very settled. Shake off even that settledness. Take a deep breath. This is helping me to move the head around a bit. Take a backward step without moving a single inch from your meditation seat, but don't get too comfortable in your meditation seat, whatever you do. And draw your chair, as F. Scott Fitzgerald reminds writers and readers. Now, draw your chair close to the precipice, and I'll tell you a story. Because tonight, I want to turn to the specific truth of sickness in the world. Why? How can a bodhisattva be sick? How is it, wonder the disciples and the bodhisattvas in Vimalakirti's presence? How can it be that a bodhisattva like Vimalakirti, a teacher, is sick? I am sick, he reminds them again and again, because the world is sick. 219 million active cases of COVID in this world now, and 5 million deaths. Some very intimately close to the assembly this evening. And for all of us, very deeply close, because we are not separate from these losses. And the bodhisattva is sick because the world is sick. So this evening, I want to, in general, everything is specific. So this evening, I want to dedicate my talk to dear friends who are facing the great matter, to Teresa Nelson, and member of the Anishinaabe Nation Turtle Mountain Band of the Chippewa Indians, who is facing brain cancer, brain tumors, pressing on her bright and active and dedicated brain. And I want to dedicate tonight also to Rose Von Totter, who's Tuscarora and Cherokee, a woman in her 80s, facing the great mystery and the threshold between life and death, absorbed by coronary heart disease. And to Michelle, courageous Michelle, who on Monday here in Northern California, underwent breast cancer surgery, removal of her breasts. A brave warrior joining 1 in 8 women in this country who are holding cancer close. So love to Michelle, healing energy to Michelle, to Rose, to Teresa. And then for a moment, just maybe put your hand on your heart, take in a deep breath and call up someone you love and know, bodhisattva or pest, and invite them into your body mind tonight for this talk. And then let's drop down another level. And in particular and specifically, I would like to dedicate this talk to Zen teacher, peace activist, author, writer, poet, Thich Nhat Hanh, who celebrated his 95th birthday on Monday, the same day Michelle entered into surgery, celebrated his 95th birthday from his home temple in Hue, Vietnam. This beautiful box I'm lifting holds a fan that my beloved friend Barbara Gates brought me home from Vietnam, from Hue. I'm not going to mutilate the Vietnamese, but the temple where Thich Nhat Hanh is resting tonight in Vietnam. So this beautiful fan from his home temple, where he entered monastic practice at the tender age of 16 years. So this talk is really remembering Thich Nhat Hanh, remembering a living Dharma teacher who is still alive and who has been dealing since 2014 with the extraordinary change in his life wrought by a massive cerebral hemorrhage in 2014 on Veterans Day, a peacemaker in the world on the 11th of November, 2014. His entire teaching life and aspect changed, and he entered into Vimalakirti's room and continues to teach. So if I may, we speak of root teachers, and Thich Nhat Hanh is clearly a root teacher for me. I'm extraordinarily grateful for the worldwide floating Sangha of Plum Village, where I became even closer and deeply involved in practice with Dharma sister Natalie Goldberg, Roshi Joan Halifax. We really met and practiced together in Plum Village in the early years, and also working with Thich Nhat Hanh, peace activists in the early 1980s in this country. Here's a monk who was born in central Vietnam in 1926. He, as I mentioned, he was ordained at Tu Hui Temple. I'm hoping Pearl can help me with this pronunciation tomorrow. At 16 years old. And in the 1950s and during his entire ordained time, he consistently remembered and listened to the call of the world. What we most need to hear, he said, is the sound of the earth crying in us. So from the very moment he entered into practice, and probably from birth onward and continuing to this day, a deep commitment to stay close to not furthering the illusion of separateness, and to staying close to engaged Buddhism and a practice that would both be solid and quiet in the world and also engaged with the suffering in the world. And Thich Nhat Hanh has been a true Dharma teacher for me. He is a lighthouse, and I also appreciate, even with great teachers, the dark at the base of the lighthouse. So he's been a beacon and also a reminder of the truth of transiency and practice in the world. In 1961, he traveled to the United States to teach comparative religion at Princeton and also throughout the United States. And in the mid-60s, he helped to form the Youth for Social Service in Vietnam, to educate children, to bring household economics to rural parts of Vietnam, to live based on the Buddhist teachings, and to share health and well-being throughout the country of Vietnam. At that time, he had some young students, and in the mid-1960s, he experienced the murder of some of his students at the hand of the war, the Vietnam War. 5 of his students were murdered and killed in the Saigon River. I have behind me on my altar the manuscript that Thich Nhat Hanh wrote during that time to recognize and to deal with the loss. Nevertheless, the Youth for Social Service continued their work throughout the 1960s, rebuilding villages. One village was rebuilt, I think, 7 or 8 times. And during all that time, the community maintained a deep connection with meditation. These were monks and monkesses, active and serving in the extended world. In 1966, Thich Nhat Hanh received lamp transmission from his teacher. Meditation is not an escape, he said. Meditation is the courage to look at reality with mindfulness and concentration. And we're here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness. Meditation is essential for our survival, our peace, and our protection. And I remember Thich Nhat Hanh telling us in the early 1980s about the necessity of holding days of mindfulness. They didn't have enough opportunity during the height of the Vietnam War to practice in a more leisurely way, but one day a month or one day every 6 weeks, they managed, or even half a day, they managed to come together in the different villages and to have a day of silence, walking, bathing, practicing, chanting, and enjoying a cup of clear water or tea. So I remember being very affected hearing about that. And in the early years of practicing with Thich Nhat Hanh, and I met Thich Nhat Hanh in 1982 when he came to San Francisco Zen Center and traveled to Tassajara Zen Mountain Center for a retreat with the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, with Robert Aiken, with Joanna Macy, with other peacemakers in the Buddhist world, engaged Buddhists, servants, students of engaged Buddhist training and practice. They traveled together to Tassajara Zen Mountain Center, and I remember Thich Nhat Hanh asking the Baker Roshi at that time at Tassajara, he said, "Your students are so sleepy. There must be too much meditation here. Could you sing a song to them to wake them up?" This was in the meditation hall, very, very Vimalakirti-esque of Thich Nhat Hanh, to shake us awake. And I remember one courageous woman from Mexico standing up and singing a country song from her native Mexico, beautiful song. And Thich Nhat Hanh said, "If you're sleepy and you are falling under the spell of separateness from your deepest practice, lift up your hand and look at your hand and remember who you are and where you come from." So I remember hearing about this at Tassajara, and shortly after, in the early 1980s, he visited us at Green Gulch. I remember meeting him on the road in 1982. He was warm and friendly and also grave and fierce. A cross, said Baker Roshi, between a tractor and a cloud. That meeting was deeply auspicious. I was able to tell Thich Nhat Hanh that his book, Lotus in a Sea of Fire, one of his, I think, most beautiful books, written in 1967, had changed our family's life. My father was serving as a publisher in New York City. He read that book. It was on our dining room table before I began to practice, 1967, 68, during the Vietnam War. And my father decided to leave his work as a publisher and to do full-time draft counseling because of reading Lotus in a Sea of Fire. And so when I met Thich Nhat Hanh to thank him for that gift, for that disruption, for the hassle and harassment and harrowing time that came into our family when we opened up our hearts and began to be more active. And I remember my father leaving New York City, was living with his wife, my stepmother, in rural Connecticut. And he began every Saturday. He stood in the town hall, town square for an hour in meditation, just silent, standing, often by himself, usually by himself, but for an hour every week. And Lotus in a Sea of Fire burned in our family's life. So when I met Thich Nhat Hanh, he was very direct. I told him that story. Later, after he'd been at Green Gulch for a few weeks, visiting on and off, he said to me in particular, "You have the most beautiful walking meditation path in North America. Why are you all so grim?" He asked. "Why are you so grim? Suffering is not enough. We have a bigger life. We have to wake up from the illusion of our separateness." And then in the months when I got to know him better, along with my Dharma brother and sister Therese Fitzgerald and Arnie Kotler, he got a little closer in and said, one day, walking on that beautiful path from the ocean to Green Gulch, he asked, "Can't we have a Zen center without Zen and without a center? Could we find a way to have Zen corners in our work and in our life?" A big question. And during that time, he was creating a Zen corner in southern France, not far from Bordeaux. Plum Village was being established in 1982 and onward from then, a refuge, because by this time, Thich Nhat Hanh, after writing Lotus in a Sea of Fire, after his activism and outspokenness, he was exiled from his country and lived in exile until he was able to return to Vietnam in 2008, almost 40 years in exile. And during that time, he chose to live in France and to be starting the community there in Plum Village in southwestern France, first living in a community called Sweet Potatoes, and then moving to Plum Village, and always keeping strong connection with mindfulness practice and being aware of the need and the sickness in the world. I do remember in his first visit to the United States, he was with us at San Francisco Zen Center. We were eating dinner in the dining room at Zen Center, and he lifted his bowl of rice. Before the meal, everyone was quiet. The dining room was full. He said, "In my two hands, I hold the perfumed rice. I hold the perfumed rice of Thailand, of the great waters of Thailand, the sweetest rice, a delicacy that children in Thailand have never tasted and will never taste in their lives. May every grain of this rice nourish the will and commitment to make peace in an unsafe world." And I remember him lifting the rice and setting it down. Vivid part of my life, remembering that. Early on in the 1980s, mid-1980s, my husband and I traveled with our then 10-year-old son to Plum Village. It was hard for Jesse to be away from baseball. I think of him, now. It was very hard. Even as a young child, he loved baseball. He connected with the Vietnamese children who were at Plum Village. They played baseball in the sunflower fields and at the edge of the community, while others of us met and practiced in a really rough and rural situation. There were 1,000 plum trees planted at Village du Pruneau in France, or the Village of Plums, 1,000 plum trees planted so that the plums, the Pruneau d'Agen, could be harvested and feed hungry children in Vietnam. And one day a week, we followed fast in the evening. So from sundown until early morning, sitting and contemplating, for Thich Nhat Hanh, quiet contemplation, the photograph of a child from Vietnam, looking at that photograph and then writing letters to the children of Vietnam, collecting medicine and the beautiful plums and trying to share the benefit of the harvest with a hungry world. Very strong memory. And also the memory of Thich Nhat Hanh writing. I remember quiet time. I remember looking up at his writing room at Plum Village, seeing the curtains billowing out in the summer wind and hearing the silence of writing down the bones, writing at the edge of the world, and producing, right? He read to us from Old Path, White Clouds, which he was writing during that time. He would read to us some of the pages. Can you be mindful while writing? A student asked him, a very sincere student asked him, can you be mindful while writing? He thought a long time and he said, it's not possible while the hand is moving to be mindful of every aspect. But now and then stop, take a deep breath in and out, be refreshed, and pick up the pen and return to the great matter. I feel so fortunate. Roshi Joan tells us in one of her last writings, she talks about her Buddhist name, True Continuation, and meeting Thich Nhat Hanh, about the Peace March, which I also was part of in 1982. There was a Peace March in the city of New York, more than 1 million people on the streets. Thich Nhat Hanh and the contingent he was with slowed down the inquiry of that march and asked people to please not hurry so much. He had enough of a crowd behind him gathering together to remind us, you moved through my country so quickly, changing our lives forever. I cannot go home on this day here in New York as you ask for peace. Can you please slow down and not hurry? Can you feel the truth of what it really takes to be a peacemaker? A cross between a tractor and a cloud. And he did it. He slowed down that whole part of the city. People were not happy. It was a kind of New York march, but he did slow down the inquiry, and we had the excruciating realization of, I am sick because the world is sick. I am working for peace in a non-peaceful world. And he said after those times, Buddhism, real Buddhism, is made of non-Buddhist elements. Remember that again and again. Find a way to open new Dharma doors. There are 84,000, he said, Dharma doors. Can't we find a way to open more in what we're doing? And we tried. During those years, we helped to organize retreats for artists. And I do definitely remember being at Ojai Center with Roshi Joan and the Ojai community, maybe, I don't know, 30 or 40 artists together for 10 days. It wasn't until the 7th day that we introduced ourselves to each other. I remember that day. There's a picture of Thich Nhat Hanh on the altar behind me from those times. So retreats for artists, for activists, for therapists, for peacemakers, for environmentalists, for children, and most deeply and effectively and surprisingly, a radical retreat for veterans of the war in Vietnam. I remember I was at Plum Village with my husband. Our son had gone home. Thich Nhat Hanh gathered us in the upper hamlet of Plum Village, and he gathered everyone from North America. There was a worldwide Sangha, but this was a smaller contingent. We gathered in the upper hamlet. He asked us, what do you think of hosting a retreat for veterans of the Vietnam War so that we can resolve some of the anger and devastation between us, the lack of understanding? And I remember Vietnamese members of the community who lived in North America, one woman in particular, got down on her knees and crawled across the circle to Thich Nhat Hanh and begged him not to do this, not to play with the fire of violence running through the war community. And nevertheless, not long after, there was the first veterans retreat at the Omega Center in Rhinebeck, New York, where veterans and monks and nuns, Vietnamese people met, talked, listened, practiced together, and that continued. One of the most important aspects of that time was the veteran writing group, where Maxine Hung Kingston and members of the of the community of mindful living organized monthly meetings for veterans to actually write their experience. They did this initially with Thich Nhat Hanh and continued for decades. Every November 11th, we gather continuously. Pandemic has closed this down a bit, but every year around, we say Veterans Day, but it's actually Armistice Day, the day we lay down our weapons. Every year we gather on this sacred day to remember and to rededicate to the work of making peace in dangerous and non-peaceful times. And then, how remarkable in 2014, on Veterans Day, to remember that Thich Nhat Hanh experienced a massive cerebral hemorrhage on that day, November 11th, 2014. So when we talk about Vimalakirti, sick in the sickbed because the world is sick, I'm not reminded, I feel and resonate with my root teacher, whose life changed massively on that Veterans Day, Armistice Day, laying down the weapons. He must have known something was moving. There were troubled waters that he needed to deal with. And he did write letters to people he was estranged from before his stroke. On September 11th, 2014, he completed a reworking of the Heart Sutra, no being, no non-being. Not a retranslation, but a reworking. And I commend to you those who want to study. I commend to you or call on you to really read his letter from September 11th, 2014, describing why he was reworking the sutra. The other shore is the reworking of the sutra, if you'd like to look at it. It's an extraordinary document 2 months before his life changed considerably. So writing down the truth was always prominent. And he also, in 2014, authored a statement to the United Nations, a statement on climate change, climate accord. I was, not long after the Veterans Retreat, the annual Veterans Retreat, I was at Upaya when we received news of Thich Nhat Hanh's stroke. I remember practicing with Roshi Joan. I remember how we took in what had happened, not turning away, recognizing, of course, the bodhisattva is sick. He carries the truth of sickness in the world. The stroke was massive enough so that Thich Nhat Hanh was in the hospital until April in France, and then back to Plum Village. And then in 2015, in July, he lived with us in San Francisco for 6 months in the home of a wealthy benefactor. Gave his entire home in the Pacific Heights area of San Francisco to Thich Nhat Hanh's care. And I visited with bringing boxes of vegetables from Green Gulch. I remember the farm crew harvesting at dawn, filling my car with vegetables because Thich Nhat Hanh was staying there in San Francisco doing some much more experimental therapy to help revitalize body mind. He lived in San Francisco for 6 months and he was hungry. And I remember bringing the food to the monks and nuns, to the mostly Vietnamese community gathered around a large community in San Francisco, completely living in the house. And I remember them taking the vegetables into the kitchen and opening the boxes and putting the vegetables in a circle. Every box was open so that there could be communication from the more than hungry world, the more than human world. This food, they said, is more than food, it's medicine. Medicine and disease subdue each other. The whole world is medicine. So I have a vivid memory of that, and also of practicing walking meditation, Thich Nhat Hanh in his wheelchair, and those of us who were members of the Order of Inner Being, as I am, walking with him on those steep streets of San Francisco. And at some point, the therapy was efficacious, but at some point, even though he suffered from this stroke, he made a gesture. The community was gathered around him. This was in the winter. And he decided to go home, and he made it very clear. He went, psh, and he made a sound. And some of the monks and some of his community said, "You want to go home?" And he nodded. "You want to go home to Plum Village?" And he nodded. And not a few days after, they returned to France. And he settled into the truth of being sick. In January of that year, with 200 monks and nuns and lay people, he moved to Khao Yan National Park in Thailand, world-class health center, Eastern medicine. And the students took him to the ocean and held him in the waves. And then after his 92nd birthday, he returned to Vietnam, to his root temple, where he'd become a monk in 1942. There's no higher religion, he said long before his stroke, than the brotherhood and sisterhood of practicing together. And that was the time when 9 United States senators, including Tom Udall, came from the US to practice with Thich Nhat Hanh, to thank him for his teaching, and to learn and study mindfulness practice. Here is a teacher who continues to teach vividly and authentically from the sickbed. To this day, his 95th year. First and foremost, a writer and a poet and a monk and a practitioner, always the writing life and the life of poetry. Now 700 monks and nuns ordained, thousands of members of the Order of Inner Being, and 10 monasteries and practice centers, and more than 100 books. Please do not build a stupa for me, Thich Nhat Hanh wrote. Please do not build a stupa for me, shortly before his stroke, also part of his writing. Please do not put my ashes in a vase. Do not lock me inside and limit who I am. If you must build a stupa, please make sure that you put a sign on it that says, "I am not in here." And in addition, you could also put another sign nearby that says, "And I'm not out there either." And a third sign that says, if I'm anywhere, it is in your mindful breathing and peaceful steps. Many of us are carrying deep inside and close to the surface of our lives, love and commitment and presence and sadness at those we know and are dedicated to, who are experiencing sickness, illness in this time. We're carrying that. The Vimalakirti Sutra brings it forth. Cognitive dissonance awareness brings it forth, that we are sick because the world is sick. And so tonight, let's think, what is the most authentic, genuine, close to the bone, non-Zen, non-anything way to bring heart and mind together in the present moment? How do we console each other in these times? How do we recognize the loss, not turn away? Behind me, this great salmon, you see a pressing of an actual salmon from the Nehalem River in Oregon, pressing of the great ones, more than human world, also facing the danger of how we live and function in these times. Not just human beings are we remembering, but the print and practice of the more than human world as well. How do we console each other in these times? In the early 1990s, Thich Nhat Hanh suggested that we pay attention and that we evoke the bodhisattvas that are in the world to help us now, to invoke their names. And actually, in the very first iteration of his practices, he called these practices evoking the bodhisattva's name. So evoking, we evoke your name, Avalokiteshvara, and aspire to learn your way of listening in order to relieve suffering in the world. And again, we evoke your name, Manjushri, so alive in the Vimalakirti Sutra. We evoke your name, Manjushri. We aspire to learn your way, which is to be still and to look deeply into the heart of beings. We evoke your name, Samantrapadra, Bodhisattva of shining practice. We aspire to practice your way, to act with eyes and heart of compassion, lifetime after lifetime. And then we evoke your name, Kshtigarbha, earth store, womb of the world. We aspire to learn your way and to be present where there is darkness, suffering, oppression, and despair, so that we may bring light, hope, relief, and liberation to these places. And today, tonight, what comes up for me is to add Vimalakirti to the list. We evoke your name, layman Vimalakirti, and aspire to learn your way, which is to turn everything upside down, to play with the Dharma, and to be illuminated by the practice again and again. We evoke your name, Vimalakirti. And then we ask ourselves, how, as Manjushri asked Vimalakirti, dear friends, dear householder, how should a bodhisattva console another bodhisattva in these times, another bodhisattva who is sick? And Vimalakirti answering across the ages into our hearts and minds. For the bodhisattva, the world consists only of living beings, and sickness is inherent in living in the world. We're all living beings free from sickness. The bodhisattva would also be free of sickness. Therefore, remind the bodhisattva again and again in your practice, the body is impermanent, but never renounce or be disgusted by the body. And let her tell you again and again that the body is miserable, yes, without encouraging you to find solace in liberation. And although the body is selfless, living beings can be developed. Although the body is peaceful, it's made of non-peaceful elements. So please do not seek, at the expense of meeting the world head on, any ultimate calm. Confess evil deeds, the layman says, but not for the sake of absolution. Encourage empathy for all living beings on account of your own sickness. And remember suffering experienced from beginningless time, and consciously, actively, thoroughly, eternally work for the welfare of all living beings, for heaven's sakes, and for the sake of the living world. And encourage the bodhisattva not to be distressed. Console one another. Manifest the roots of virtue. Maintain primal purity and the lack of craving. Maintain it under all circumstances. And always strive to heal and resolve to cure all sicknesses. Thus should a bodhisattva console a sick bodhisattva. Again and again, use great compassion to heal the brokenheartedness that arises from great compassion. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for inscribing and widening and keeping open that semi-permeable circle of the way so that sorrow and loneliness are as welcome as your upright, full-on, dedicated sitting. Leave a gap so the world can grow and so that we can meet each other without any illusion of separateness, lifetime after lifetime. Thank you for tonight. Thank you for your practice. And thank you for your work.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And just the corn behind you reminds. Sorry, just a second. I think a fire alarm is going off. You're right back.
Enjoy your breathing. No gap. No gap.
Sorry about that.
Everything Obikus is burning, and you've just proven it, Kigaku.
Yeah. I just wanted to, you were talking about good work in the world, and what a deep and wonderful Dharma talk. Thank you. And just looking at the corn behind you next to the fish, I also am reminded of our harvest at the Upaya Gardens, the windmill garden, which you remotely helped us to plant. And I wondered if I could share some pictures from today.
Oh, throw us in the briar patch. Yes.
Here are a few images of the wonderful squashes. And
the oldest of the sisters.
We had to find places in the kitchen to store the squashes, and it's just turned cool enough to have the fires going in the kitchen.
Glorious.
The beans.
May all beans come to the table and be eaten.
May all beans be happy. Amaranth, like incredible maroon and crimson. The corn.
Oh, Lord, Lord, Lord.
What do you say about the corn, Wendy, when there's a little bit of white? It's been doing what?
There's been a little hanky-panky, but thank heavens. Certainly Vimalakirti reminds us hanky-panky is welcome. It builds character and continues the circle of existence. So look at that extraordinary corn, the sacred corn of the Tewan nations. Oh, the first people of this land. Oh my Lord, what a harvest. Actually, the corn is very clean. There's very little evidence of cross-pollination. The white kernels, they just indicate a little bit of crossing, but basically this is really close to origin.
Pure
corn.
Beautiful. And there's Sarah with the squash.
Beautiful. Oh, well. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you.
So thank you for the residents for stewarding that garden, and for Wendy being our inspiration for it. And for everyone, we're going to have a seminar with Wendy tomorrow to discuss some of the, whatever's come up for us in this time. And then on Friday, Roshi Joan will be giving the Dharma talk. So we look forward to that as well. And then after that, Sesshin begins. Thank you so much, Wendy, for your wonderful
Yeah,
talk.
thank you, everybody. Thank you, Roshi. It's gratitude for Upaya Zen Center for the semi-permeable circle of the way and for practice for the benefit of all beings. Time to chant, right?
It is.
Creations are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless, I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless, I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable,